Genene Ann Jones was born on July 13th in 1950. As soon as she was born, her biological parents gave her up for adoption. After she was adopted, she had a relatively normal childhood. When she entered high school, her father began to get sick and her mother began drinking. She had three siblings, and she was especially close with her youngest brother. She would often pretend to be ill in order to gain attention and sympathy from others. When she was only 16 years old, her younger brother created a pipe bomb. It went wrong and malfunctioned, blowing up in his face. Some said that this trauma may be the reasoning for why she ended up committing the crimes that she did. After her father grew sick and her mother began drinking. Not too soon after her brother died from his accident, her father died from terminal cancer. Genene thought that the only way to cure her sadness and depression was to marry. Despite her mother's drinking and oftentimes being drunk, she would not allow Genene to marry, as she thought she was too young and saw that it was too soon after the family tragedies. Eventually, she graduated and married a man named James Harvey Donnelly Jr. He eventually enlisted in the Navy, and she was unfaithful to him. After he came back from the Navy, she had their child. After 4 years of their marriage, she divorced him while he was still injured and recovering in the hospital. She had a career in the hospital beauty salon. Her older brother died of cancer as well, and she decided to start training to become a nurse because she feared that the dye would cause cancer later down the line. Time she began training as a nurse, she was also pregnant, so she left her kids in the care of her adoptive mother. She was fired from her first job as a nurse after only 8 months because she was trying to make decisions in which place she had no authority in. She was hired by another hospital, but that didn't last long either. Her most permanent job was in an intensive care section in a pediatric unit at Bexar County Medical Center. This is where she began her string of horrible crimes for years without being caught. It was at this job where she would later be known as the Angel of Death, and her shift she worked would later be known as the Death Shift. When Genene first started killing, she always picked those with fatal conditions. The first baby that she chose was a victim that had died shortly after surgery, and Genene went into hysterics. Other nurses that were working at the time were shocked, as she barely even had a connection with the child. Eventually, she insisted that it was important she was the one caring for certain babies. She skipped all her classes in proper drug handling and made several errors, both dispensing and using medications. One night had significant grounds for dismissal, as she came in drunk, but the head nurse liked Genene, so she was not fired. She would bully newer nurses into looking to her for help. Several nurses transferred because of her. As she took charge in the hospital, she talked about many topics that were not appropriate for the place in which she worked. This caused a lot of nurses to get fed up with her, and many began to not like her. When the hospital got a new head doctor, he made sure that people took more responsibility for their actions. The other nurses didn't like this, but Genene loved the idea because that meant more attention towards her. In 1981, Jones demanded that she was put in charge of the sickest of patients. She would always break down, crying in hysterics like she did the first time when the child didn't make it, even though most of the time she hardly knew the child at all. No one really thought much of her strange actions at first because she knew how to put an IV into a baby, which was the most difficult task to do. One person claims that within 2 weeks, 7 babies died. The need for resuscitation was constant, but it was only on times Genene worked. One child had a seizure 3 days in a row, but it was only on Genene's shift. Genene began to joke that they were beginning to call her the death nurse, which some of the staff already referred to her shift as the death shift due to how many babies actually died when she was working. Genene even seemed to enjoy calling the parents of the children and telling them that their child had died. Nurses soon began to realize that babies were dying from conditions that should not have been considered fatal. Rumors were passed around that she was doing something to the babies that was causing them to die, when there was nothing wrong with them. What really happened What made them realize that something was going on was a baby named Jose Antonio Flores that came in with common symptoms of childhood sickness. While he was under Janine's care, he developed unexplained seizures and went into cardiac arrest. The doctors took almost an hour trying to save him, and then they realized that he was bleeding uncontrollably and unexplainably, and the blood was not clotting properly. Eventually, the problem subsided and they thought he would be fine. But the next day, he died from his unexplained symptoms, again on Janine's shift. Blood testing on Jose's body indicated high levels of heparin in the baby's body, which is an anticoagulant. No one in the hospital had ordered this drug. After the doctors ordered limited use of the drug, she switched to another and kept killing. It is said that in her time as a nurse at the hospital, she was suspected to have killed over 46 babies. However, when she was arrested and tried, she only pled guilty to 2 cases of killing, later on pleading to 5 cases. However, it is suspected that many more deaths were caused by her and her horrific actions. She is now suffering life in prison due to her actions. And this is an image of the hospital that she worked at. This is her when she first started her killings and became a nurse. And this one is her after she was finally tried and convicted for the murders. Thank you for listening to my podcast on Genene and Jones.